Welcome to part 2 of the secret history of the Democrat Party that they don't want anyone to know about. In part 1, we have seen how the Democrat Party brutally oppressed black Americans using the violent KKK gang, racist Jim Crow laws, and the Confederacy. If you haven't already watched it, please do so after this video to give you a more complete understanding of this political party. I will give the link below. Now, we will look at how this same political party used the same means to keep another minority ethnicity from living their American dream. So stick around as you learn more about the dark past of the Democrat Party. But in the meantime, please hit those like and subscribe buttons and feel free to share my videos with others, especially students. Let's begin. It was not just black Americans who are victims of the Democratic Party's long history of racism, slavery, and Jim Crow. Very few people know about the sad story of another group of minorities who had to deal with these racist Democrats. For over 150 years, the Democratic Party has systematically targeted, excluded, and betrayed Asian Americans. And surprisingly, they're still doing it today. From the Chinese who built America's railroads, to the Japanese families torn from their homes, from the brave free Vietnamese allies they abandoned to die, to the Asian students they punished for being too smart, the Democratic Party has been making Asian Americans their preferred scapegoats whenever it's politically convenient. It's the 1860s. America needed to do the impossible. Construct a continental railroad linking the East Coast to the West Coast. The work was deadly, the pay low, and conditions backbreaking. Men were lowered down cliffs in baskets to plant explosives. They worked through brutal winters and scorching summers. And who did these dangerous jobs? The hated Irish and Chinese immigrants. Over 15,000 Chinese workers risked their lives building the Central Pacific Railroad. They were paid less than white workers, only $26 a month compared to $35 for whites. They had to buy their own food and supplies. Hundreds died in avalanches, explosions, and accidents. But they got the job done and the railroad was finished. Unfortunately, shortly after, the economy hit rough times. White workers needed someone to blame. And Democrat politicians? They saw an opportunity. A golden opportunity to exploit at the expense of Asians. In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act was signed into law, the first in American history to ban an entire race from entering the country. But here's what they don't tell you. Democratic politicians across the West Coast have been pushing for this for years. Californian Democrats led the charge. Dennis Kearney, a Democratic labor leader in San Francisco, gave speeches to crowds of thousands, screaming, "The Chinese must go! The Chinese must go!" His followers would march through Chinatowns, destroying businesses and attacking anyone who looked Asian. The law worked exactly as Democrats intended. In 1881, 12,000 Chinese had entered the US. In 1887, the number had dropped to a mere 10. Families were forever separated. Men who had worked in America for decades couldn't bring their wives or children over. Those who left to visit family in China could never return. But Democrats weren't done. In 1888, they passed the Scott Act, which canceled the re-entry permits of 20,000 Chinese workers who were visiting family in China. These men had legal papers promising they could return to America. Democrats coldly tore up those promises and left them stranded. Then came 1892. The Geary Act, passed under Democratic President Grover Cleveland, forced every Chinese person in America to carry identification papers at all times. No other group had to do this. Got caught without your papers? Immediate deportation back to China. Think about that. Chinese Americans, many born in this country, had to carry papers like they were prisoners in their own homeland. For 40 years, from 1924 to 1965, Asian immigration was essentially zero. Entire communities withered away. Families grew old and died alone, never seeing their relatives again due to racist Democrat laws. While keeping Asians out, Democrats also made sure those already here couldn't succeed. In 1913, California passed the Alien Land Law, making it illegal for aliens ineligible for citizenship, code word for Asians, to own land. Japanese immigrants had become incredibly successful farmers. By 1920, they produced a huge percent of California's crops, despite being less than 1% of the population. Democrats couldn't stand it because these racists believed whites should be superior over all others. Thus, they passed laws forcing Japanese farmers to sell their land. Families who had worked for decades building successful farms lost everything overnight. San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, all run by Democrats, all with laws keeping Asians in ghettos. Even successful Asian families couldn't move to white neighborhoods, no matter how much money they had. December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor is attacked. Within hours, FBI agents were knocking on doors, arresting Japanese American community leaders. These weren't spies or saboteurs, they were teachers, farmers, business owners, and religious leaders whose only crime was being Japanese. Then came February 19, 1942. Democratic President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 into law. With the stroke of a pen, he authorized the forced removal of 120,000 Japanese Americans from their homes. Let that number sink in. 120,000 people. 2/3 were American citizens. Some families had been in America for 3 generations, meaning they were more American than some newly arrived white immigrants. Sadly, this didn't matter to your typical Democrat racist and a white supremacist. It's as though racism is in the DNA of many Democrats. The Wakasa family in California owned a successful flower nursery. They were forced to sell everything for only $300, property and equipment worth over $15,000. The Yamadas lost their grocery store that took 20 years to build. The Tanakas watched their restaurant get sold to competitors for almost nothing. Then came the camps. 10 concentration camps in remote desert locations such as Manzanar in California, Topaz in Utah, and Hot Mountain in Wyoming. Families lived in horse stalls and barracks with no privacy, no dignity, nothing. The camps were surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers complete with machine guns pointing inwards to the jailed American citizens. Armed soldiers watched them like foreign enemies. Children grew up behind fences, not understanding why they were there. Here's the most heartbreaking part. 33,000 Japanese Americans served in the US military during World War II. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, made up mostly of Japanese Americans, became the most decorated unit in US military history. They fought in Europe while their families sat in American concentration camps. For decades after the war, Democrats denied they had done anything wrong. They called it a wartime necessity and reasoned that Japanese Americans were treated well. They desperately tried to rewrite history to make themselves look sinless. It took over 40 years for justice to arrive. In 1988, Republican President Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act, formally apologizing for the internment and providing $20,000 in reparations to each survivor. President Reagan didn't have to do this. Most survivors were elderly. Many had already died, but he did it because it was the right thing to do. He called the internment a grave injustice based on race prejudice, wartime hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. And where were the Democrats? Many opposed the reparations, saying it was too expensive, that too much time had passed. Really? Is that the best you can come up with? Again, it is Republicans who have to right a wrong the Democrats made, like by ending slavery and giving equal rights to blacks.
Of Congress and distinguished guests, my fellow Americans, we gather here today to right a grave wrong. More than 40 years ago, shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry living in the United States were forcibly removed from their homes and placed in makeshift internment camps. This action was taken without trial, without jury. It was based solely on race, for these 120,000 were Americans of Japanese descent. Yes, the nation was then at war, struggling for its survival, and it's not for us today to pass judgment upon those who may have made mistakes while engaged in that great struggle. Yet we must recognize that the internment of Japanese Americans was just that, a mistake. For throughout the war, Japanese Americans in the tens of thousands remained utterly loyal to the United States.
Fast forward to 1975. South Vietnam is collapsing. For years, brave South Vietnamese soldiers heroically fought alongside Americans against communist invaders. They trusted us and we promised to support them. Even in 1972, when most American troops were already sent back to America, South Vietnam defeated an even larger communist invasion than the 1968 Tet Offensive 4 years earlier. This proves that with enough weapons and supplies from America, South Vietnam could easily defeat the communists. The free Vietnamese people trusted us and we promised to support them. Then, Democrats in Congress, led by figures like Senator Joe Biden, cut off all military aid to South Vietnam. Republican President Ford begged Congress for $722 million in emergency aid. Democrats said no, let the Vietnamese people die. No surprise there at all. The result? Communist forces broke the peace treaty to attack and invade. Saigon fell on April 30th, 1975. What followed was a bloodbath. Over 200,000 South Vietnamese were sent to re-education camps, communist concentration camps where torture and death were common. Millions more fled on foot or on small watercrafts as boat people, risking death at sea rather than live under communist rule. Unfortunately, many of these refugees did not make it to new shores to find peace and freedom due to starvation, thirst, disease, and violent attacks. My family was among these desperate boat people who fled with just the clothing on our back. We had to try 13 times before finally got picked up by a Canadian cargo ship. Months of hungry terror at the hands of Thai pirates and storms almost destroyed our tiny boat along with everyone on board. Here's where it gets even more personal. When these refugees tried to come to America, Democrats opposed them. Senator Joe Biden, yes, the same Joe Biden who became president, specifically opposed accepting Vietnamese and other Southeast Asian war refugees. In 1975, Biden said accepting Vietnamese refugees would just add to America's problems. He worried about the cost, the cultural differences, the potential security risks. This from the party that claims to welcome immigrants. Think about the irony. Democrats started a war in Vietnam under Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. They escalated it, sending over 500,000 American troops. Then, when their allies needed help the most, they abandoned them to die. And you don't need much figuring out how KKK member Democrat Senator Robert Byrd voted. Joe Biden still looks up to his white Democrat racist mentor and friend. Because the Democrats let South Vietnam die, the communists took over Laos and Cambodia as well. In Cambodia, the genocidal Khmer Rouge murdered 2 million people in the most cruelest and barbaric ways ever imagined. Add another 3 million Vietnamese and 100,000 Laotian deaths, and you get over 5 million Asian deaths. This tragedy could easily have been prevented had the Democrats given aid to our Asian allies. But the Democrat criminals backstabbed and let them fall into the vengeful hands of the communists, knowing full well what would happen once communism took over. The Democrats again have blood on their hands, this time innocent Asian blood instead of innocent black blood. Never ever forget the 5 million Asian lives lost because of the evil Democrats. If you might think this is all ancient history, you would be wrong. The Democratic Party's war on Asian Americans continues today, but it's more sophisticated and sneaky. Meet the modern face of Democratic discrimination, affirmative action in college admissions. Elite universities like Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, all with strong ties to Democratic politics, have been systematically discriminating against Asian American students for decades. The numbers don't lie. Asian American students need SAT scores 140 points higher than white students and 450 points higher than black students to have the same chance of admission at elite colleges.
Has concluded that Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut systematically discriminates against Asian and white applicants.
Justice is suing Yale University, alleging discrimination against Asian American and white applicants.
Asian Americans are set to a higher bar compared to other applicants. Had I been African American Latino, I might have gone to more schools. I'm not even sure myself.
Princeton University, Asian applicants must score 140 points higher on the SAT than white students do, 270 points higher than black students do, and 450 points higher than African American students just to have the same shot at getting in.
So while Asian Americans may have perfect SAT scores, 4.0 GPAs, accolades, extracurricular sports, and talent, seems the Crimson H thinks they don't deliver as much personality. Finally fed up, an organization called the Students for Fair Admissions filed a lawsuit against the university on Friday, alleging discriminatory admission practices.
In 2018, the Students for Fair Admissions lawsuit revealed how Harvard rated Asian American applicants. Despite having higher test scores and grades, Asian students consistently receive lower personality ratings. Asian students were described as book smart but lacking warmth, likability, and positive personality. These things you can't make up. Sounds familiar? It's the same language used to exclude Jewish students from Ivy League schools in the 1920s and 1930s. It's as though Jim Crow laws of yesteryears had morphed and evolved to target Asians of today. Government contracts, university programs, corporate diversity initiatives all use racial quotas that help every minority group except Asians. A small business owned by an Asian immigrant gets no diversity benefits, while competitors with the right skin color get special treatments. During COVID-19, attacks on Asian Americans increased by 339%. Elderly Asian people were punched, kicked, and murdered on the streets of San Francisco, New York, and other Democratic-controlled cities. But here's what Democrats didn't want to talk about. Many of these attacks weren't committed by white supremacists. They were committed by other minority groups in Democratic strongholds. In San Francisco, 84-year-old Vicha Ratanapaki was killed when a young man ran full speed and body slammed him to the ground. In New York, 61-year-old Yao Pan Ma was stomped to death while collecting cans for recycling. Democratic prosecutors in these cities often reduce charges, release suspects without bail, or blame mental health issues instead of holding attackers accountable. When Asian Americans protested, demanding justice, Democratic politicians were nowhere to be found. Where were the solidarity marches? Where were the federal hate crime investigations? Where was the media coverage? The silence was deafening. Democrats love to use Asian Americans as a weapon against other minorities. They point to Asian success and say, see, if they can do it, why can't you? This creates resentment between minority groups while ignoring the real barriers Asians face. But when Asians ask for equal treatment, suddenly Democrats forget about their success. Suddenly Asians are told they're white adjacent or privileged. Again, you can't make up all this insanity. Because of this, Asians are erased from diversity programs, excluded from minority business opportunities, and told that discrimination doesn't count. It's a perfect trap. When it's convenient, Democrats use Asian success to shame other minorities. When Asians demand fairness, Democrats dismiss them as being too privileged. Look at the pattern. For 140 years, Democrats have used the same playbook against Asian Americans. First, they invited Asians to America when they needed cheap labor or political allies. Then, when times get tough or other groups complain, Democrats scapegoat these Asians. Finally, they rewrite history to make themselves look like the good guys. Chinese workers built the railroads, then got kicked out from the country as unwanted pests. Japanese Americans served in World War II while getting locked up in concentration camps. Vietnamese allies fought alongside American soldiers, then got abandoned to communist criminal murderers. Asian students work hard and succeed, then get punished for being too successful. The faces change, the excuses change, but we're still playing the same racism game. Your great-grandfather might have built the railroad that connected this country. Your grandmother might have lost everything in an internment camp. Your parents might have fled a war for their very lives and lost everything because of the Democrats' cowardly betrayal. And today, your children are being punished for succeeding. In other words, the system punishes Asians for being Asian no matter what. This is personal. This isn't just politics or history. This is your family story, your struggle, your pain that they want to erase and pretend never happened. In part 1, you saw what they did to Black Americans. Now you know what they have been doing to Asian Americans the past 150 years. You can easily say that Asians suffered even more than blacks under the cruelty of the Democrats. And in part 3, we'll keep pulling back the curtains. More lies, more shocking truths, and more voices that need to be heard. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Your family's sacrifices matter. Don't let them bury the truth with pretty speeches about diversity and inclusion. Share this video with everyone you can, because we need to expose the horrendous crimes that Democrats have been inflicting against Asian Americans. The Democrats have shown us exactly who they are for the past 150 years. It's time we started questioning everything they say and fight back for our family, people, and future. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in part 3 of this Secrets of the Democrat Party series.